It was early summer when a few of my friends and I decided to rent an Airbnb for the weekend. We'd all been busy with work and needed a break, something quiet and away from the noise of the city. There were 5 of us all together, and after a few hours of scrolling online listings, we found a small house about 3 hours away. It sat on a dirt road outside a small town, surrounded by trees and fields. The pictures made it look simple but comfortable. Wooden floors, an old porch, a big yard, and a small lake just a short walk behind it. It seemed perfect. The drive there was long but calm. The last stretch of road turned from asphalt to gravel, then to dirt, winding deeper into empty countryside. Cell signal started fading until there was none at all. The last house we passed was about 10 minutes away from where the GPS stopped. The Airbnb looked almost exactly like the pictures, though maybe more weathered. Paint was peeling along the siding, and the porch steps creaked under our weight. The yard grass was overgrown, and one of the windows upstairs had a curtain that looked torn from the inside. We carried our bags in and walked through the place, checking it out room by room. Inside, the air felt a little stale, like it hadn't been opened up in a while. The living room had a few mismatched chairs and a sagging couch. The kitchen was old but clean enough, with a faint smell of damp wood. There were 3 bedrooms, 1 upstairs and 2 down the hall, each with thin mattresses and old furniture. The floorboards groaned under every step, especially upstairs. We unpacked, opened the windows, and turned on the ceiling fans to air the place out. The first few hours were normal. We grilled some food outside, played music from a Bluetooth speaker, and drank a few beers while the sun went down. The quietness around us was nice at first. No cars, no voices, just the sound of crickets and the occasional breeze. But as night came, the silence started to feel heavier. It was so quiet that even the smallest sound stood out. A loose shutter hitting the wall, the fan's blades ticking, the sound of someone's chair scraping against the porch floorboards even when everyone was sitting still. It was hard to tell what was normal and what wasn't because everything echoed a bit out there. When it got fully dark, we went inside. There wasn't much light around the property, just 1 dim bulb above the porch and a small motion light near the driveway. Inside, the house felt different at night. Every creak sounded closer. The wood popped randomly, maybe from the temperature change. The wind outside had picked up and brushed against the windows in a steady rhythm that started to sound like footsteps if you listened too long. None of us said much about it. We just turned up the music and tried to ignore it. Around midnight, we started getting ready for bed. I took the upstairs room since it had the biggest window that overlooked the yard and lake. The others stayed downstairs. The house was old enough that you could hear almost every movement. I could hear my friends talking faintly below me, the sound of a door closing, then footsteps heading down the hall. After that, it got quiet again. I tried to sleep but kept waking up. The wind made the window rattle, and at one point, I thought I heard the floor creak in the hallway. It wasn't a slow groan like the house settling. It was sharper, like the sound of a step. I held still and listened, expecting to hear another one, but nothing followed. I figured it was just the house. I must have fallen asleep eventually, because I woke up around 3 a.m. to the faint sound of something moving again. This time it was outside. From my bed, I could see the reflection of the porch light through the window. Something moved across it, blocking the light for a second. It looked like a shadow passing by, slow and steady. I sat up, trying to see through the glass, but it was too dark beyond the light's reach. Then, I noticed the motion sensor near the driveway blink on for a moment and then off again. It wasn't windy anymore, and the motion sensor only lit when something moved in front of it. I waited for it to come on again, but it stayed dark. After a few minutes, I convinced myself it might have been a stray animal. I lay back down but didn't sleep much the rest of the night. In the morning, everything looked normal. The yard was empty, the driveway clear. My friends said they'd slept fine, though one of them mentioned hearing what sounded like a door shifting sometime in the night. We brushed it off and went about the day. The second night was quieter, but somehow more tense. We had all started to notice little things we hadn't before. The bathroom window wouldn't stay locked. It kept sliding open a few inches no matter how many times we closed it. The back door handle felt loose, like it had been turned too hard. When we went out to the lake, we found footprints along the muddy edge that didn't match any of ours. They were older, but still recent, leading from the trees to the water and back again. That night, we decided to lock every door and window. We stacked some chairs under the doorknobs, just in case. We weren't joking around anymore, but nobody wanted to say out loud what we were all thinking. I stayed upstairs again, though I regretted it later. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a noise that I still remember clearly. The sound of gravel crunching outside, like slow footsteps moving around the side of the house. The sound stopped near the porch. Then, faintly, the wood creaked, the same way it had when we'd walked across it earlier that day. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to my heartbeat and that soft shifting sound of wood under weight. It lasted maybe a minute, then stopped. I thought whoever it was might have gone away, but after a while, I heard something else. A long, dragging sound like someone's sleeve brushing against the wall outside, moving slowly toward the window. My breath caught. I couldn't see anything clearly through the glass because of how dark it was, but I thought I saw the faint outline of something close to the window frame, just standing there. The motion light didn't come on this time. I didn't move the rest of the night. When morning came, I went outside with one of my friends to look. The ground below my window had a few scuff marks in the dirt, the kind you might make by turning your foot or standing still for a while. Near the porch steps, we found more. Shallow prints that weren't ours, too wide and too spaced out to be from the night before. We packed up that afternoon. Nobody argued about leaving early. The ride home was quiet, all of us half tired, half thinking about how strange everything had felt out there. When we finally got signal again, one of my friends checked the Airbnb listing. The host's page was gone. No reviews, no contact info, nothing. Just an error message where the listing used to be. A few weeks later, I went back to the listing's name just out of curiosity. Someone else had relisted the same house under a different owner. The description said, "Recently vacated rural property, newly available." No mention of the previous host. No photos of the upstairs room. I never told anyone that when I looked closely at one of the photos, I could see what looked like a faint mark on the outside wall beneath that same window. A long, dark streak, like something had been leaning against it for a long time. I've stayed in other Airbnbs since then, but I always check the windows first. I make sure every lock works, every motion light turns on, and every door is solid. But sometimes, even when everything feels safe, I still wake up in the middle of the night, thinking I hear that same slow creak of footsteps outside, circling quietly in the dark where the lights don't reach. It was supposed to be a simple weekend getaway, just me and 3 friends, taking a break from work, renting an Airbnb up north where we could relax for a few days, cook, maybe go hiking, and get away from the noise of everything. We'd all been working long hours and needed something quiet, something cheap, something different. One of my friends found the place online. It looked perfect. A large house near a lake, surrounded by trees, and with a big deck in the back. The pictures made it look peaceful, almost too peaceful. We left early on a Friday afternoon, packed our stuff, and drove for hours through back roads until we finally reached the small town where the Airbnb was supposed to be. The house was about 15 minutes outside the town center, down a narrow gravel road that wound through thick woods. The signal on our phones started cutting in and out as soon as we left the main road. It felt isolated, which was part of the reason we liked it at first. When we arrived, the sun was just beginning to set. The house stood alone, a pale gray building with peeling paint and a slanted roof. The driveway was full of dried leaves and broken branches, like it hadn't been cleaned in a while. There was no sign of the host, just a lockbox with the key hanging from a rusty hook near the door. The air smelled like pine and damp soil. It was quiet enough that I could hear the sound of insects humming in the distance. Inside, the place looked old but livable. Wooden floors that creaked under every step, faded curtains, and mismatched furniture. The kitchen looked outdated, and there was dust on some of the window frames, but nothing that seemed alarming. There were 3 bedrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs, so we divided them quickly and unpacked. That first night was uneventful. We cooked, talked, and stayed up late, laughing about how creepy the woods looked in the dark. The place didn't have Wi-Fi, and our phones barely had service, so we were cut off completely. We didn't think much of it then. It was part of the charm. I went to bed sometime around 1 in the morning. The room I took was at the end of the hall upstairs, right across from another bedroom that 2 of my friends shared. The last one slept downstairs in the smaller room near the kitchen. I fell asleep fast. Sometime during the night, I woke up to a sound. It was faint at first, just a soft creak coming from somewhere downstairs. I stayed still, listening, waiting to hear if it was just the house settling. The sound came again, a slow, deliberate step, followed by another. It sounded like someone walking around. I assumed it was one of my friends getting up for water or going to the bathroom. I didn't move, just listened until the noise stopped. Then I drifted back to sleep. In the morning, everyone looked tired. One of my friends said he'd heard footsteps too, and another said he thought he saw a light in the hallway during the night. We brushed it off. Maybe someone had gotten up and forgotten about it. It wasn't a big deal. We spent the rest of the day outside near the lake, cooking food, taking pictures, and exploring the trail behind the property. The area was quiet, too quiet sometimes. We didn't see any other houses around, and we didn't see a single person all day. That night it rained. It started with light drops and turned into heavy, steady rain that lasted for hours. The wind picked up, and the trees outside creaked. We sat inside by a small lamp, drinking and talking while the storm hit the windows. There was something oddly comforting about being stuck inside with the rain around us. I went to bed later than usual. The air inside the house felt damp from the storm. The wooden floors felt colder. As I was drifting off, I heard it again. Those faint footsteps. Only this time, they didn't sound like someone moving casually around. They were slow, uneven, like someone stepping carefully to avoid making noise. I listened, eyes open in the dark, my heartbeat picking up. I could hear the soft groan of the old wood floor downstairs, then silence, then another faint sound near the bottom of the stairs. It went quiet for a long time. I thought maybe my mind was playing tricks. But then I heard what sounded like the faint click of a door opening, just slightly, like someone testing it. I sat up. My room door was closed, but not locked. The sound didn't come again. After a while, I got up and looked out the window. The rain had slowed, but everything outside was black, the trees barely visible against the night sky. I couldn't see anything unusual, but the feeling in my chest didn't go away. The next morning, I woke up early. I went downstairs to make coffee. As soon as I reached the kitchen, I noticed something strange. The back door, the one that led out to the deck, was slightly open. Just an inch or two, enough to let in cold air. None of us had used it the night before. I closed it and checked the lock. It didn't feel very secure. The latch was loose, and it rattled when I pushed on it. When everyone else got up, I mentioned it. One of my friends said he'd thought he heard something near the deck in the night but didn't bother checking. Another said they were sure the door was shut before we went to bed. We laughed about it again, but none of us seemed as relaxed as before. Later that afternoon, we decided to drive into town for groceries. We locked everything before leaving, double-checked the doors and windows, and made sure nothing was left open. The drive took about 20 minutes, and when we came back a few hours later, the first thing I noticed was the door again. It was open wider this time. We all stopped, staring at it. None of us wanted to be the first to go inside. The lights were still off, and the house looked normal from where we stood, but something felt wrong. We eventually went in together, checking every room. Nothing seemed missing, but there were small things that didn't look the same. One of the chairs near the table had been moved slightly, and one of the drawers in the living room was open. It was unsettling. We couldn't tell if someone had actually been inside or if we were imagining it, but the sense of unease stayed heavy in the air. That night, none of us slept easily. We kept hearing noises, small, random creaks. Maybe it was the wind, maybe it was the house shifting, but every sound made me more alert. Around 2 a.m., I thought I heard something again from downstairs. I stayed completely still, my ears straining. This time, it was clearer. The faint sound of footsteps, followed by the sound of something brushing against the floor. Then silence. I didn't sleep again after that. The next morning, when the sun finally came up, I went downstairs with one of my friends. We found muddy footprints on the floor near the back door. Fresh ones, still damp, leading from the door into the kitchen and then stopping near the hallway. They weren't ours. None of us had gone outside since the rain. That was enough. We packed our things without even talking about it. None of us wanted to stay another night. As we loaded the car, I looked back at the house. From the outside, it looked completely normal again, quiet, still, almost inviting in the daylight. But I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints, or the way the door had been unlocked twice. We drove straight back to town and called the host once we got signal, but they never answered. When we checked the listing later, it was gone. No trace of it anywhere. For days after that, I kept replaying it in my head. How easily someone could have been watching us in that house, coming and going without us even noticing. Maybe they had a spare key. Maybe they lived nearby and used the place when guests weren't around. I'll never know. Now, whenever I book an Airbnb, I check everything the moment I walk in. I check under the beds, behind the curtains, every lock, every window. I never stay anywhere too remote anymore, because that weekend taught me something I won't forget. When you rent a place that isn't yours, you're trusting a stranger with your safety, and sometimes that stranger might be closer than you think. I booked the Airbnb because it looked peaceful and simple. A small house on the edge of a quiet neighborhood, with white walls, a tiny porch, and a big window that overlooked a patch of trees. I had been traveling for work, moving from city to city for weeks, and this place seemed like a good spot to rest. The reviews mentioned how private it was and how friendly the host seemed. That mattered to me. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. When I first arrived, everything looked fine. The host wasn't there to greet me, but the key was left in a small lockbox near the front door. The place smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The furniture looked old but cared for, and the air felt heavy from being closed up too long. I remember walking through slowly, checking everything like I always did in rentals: doors, windows, locks. The bedroom was small, just a bed, a dresser, and a little desk under a window that looked out onto the backyard. There was something about the view that felt off, though. The backyard was fenced, but behind the fence were trees that grew close together. The shade there looked darker than it should have been for late afternoon. I tried not to think too much about it. That night I unpacked, ate something I'd brought from a nearby store, and spent a while scrolling on my phone before getting ready for bed. I locked the door from the inside, checked the windows again, and left a small lamp on because I didn't like sleeping in complete darkness in unfamiliar places. I tried to sleep, but I could hear faint noises now and then. The wood creaking, the refrigerator humming louder than usual, maybe something shifting outside. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses do that. I woke up sometime around 3 a.m. The room was dimly lit by the lamp, and everything seemed still. I don't know what woke me at first. Maybe a noise, maybe just a strange feeling. My chest felt tight, like I'd been startled in my sleep. I lay there for a few seconds, eyes half open, trying to figure out why I felt uneasy. Then I saw movement in the hallway, just a faint shadow against the light spilling in from the small lamp I'd left on in the living room. At first, I thought maybe it was just the curtains moving from air or a trick of the light, but the shape didn't move like that. It was too steady. I blinked hard, thinking I was imagining it, and then the shadow shifted again. My heart started to pound. It was a person, someone standing halfway in the hallway, halfway out of sight. I stayed completely still. I didn't want to make a sound. My brain tried to make sense of it, to come up with any explanation that wasn't what it looked like. Maybe the host had come back for something. Maybe they forgot something in the house. Maybe this was all some misunderstanding. But no part of that made sense, because they shouldn't have had a reason to come inside at 3 in the morning without knocking. The shadow moved again, slow and quiet. I could hear soft footsteps now, the sound of bare feet on the wood floor. Whoever it was, they were trying not to wake me. That made it worse. That detail made it real. I watched the edge of the doorframe. I could feel every breath scrape through my chest as I tried to breathe silently. Then I saw him. A man stepped into the doorway, thin, middle-aged, his face half hidden in the dim light. He froze for a second when his eyes met mine, like he didn't expect me to be awake. He stood there, still and silent, staring at me. I couldn't move. My mind was spinning, trying to figure out what to do, but every instinct told me not to move, not to speak, not to make him react. Then, after a long few seconds, he stepped back, turned, and walked away down the hallway. I could hear the faint click of the front door opening and closing. I stayed frozen in bed for a long time, staring at the door, afraid he would come back. When I finally found the courage to get up, I turned on every light in the house. The living room was empty. The front door was closed, but when I checked the lock, it wasn't the same as I'd left it. It looked like it had been forced open slightly. One of the bolts didn't slide in all the way. The lock was old and rusty. I tried turning it a few times and realized it didn't even catch properly. Anyone could have pushed it open from the outside with enough force. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my things. I didn't even care about packing neatly. I just threw everything into my bag. I didn't want to stay another second. When I stepped outside, the night air felt cold and sharp. The street was quiet, and all the other houses were dark. I got into my car and drove until I found a gas station with lights still on. I sat there for a while, trying to calm down. I went over it again and again in my head, trying to figure out what just happened. The man hadn't said anything. He hadn't tried to hurt me, but the way he stood there, the way he moved, it didn't feel like an accident. He didn't knock. He didn't call out. He didn't act like someone who thought the place was empty. He acted like someone who knew I was there. The next morning, I went back after the sun came up. I didn't want to, but I needed to get the rest of my stuff that I'd left behind in my panic. The door was still unlocked when I arrived. Inside, everything looked the same, but I noticed small things that hadn't been that way before. A few of my things on the dresser were slightly moved. The drawer I'd left shut was open halfway. That's when I realized that maybe this wasn't the first time he'd done it. Maybe he had a spare key, or the lock had always been weak enough to let him in whenever he wanted. Maybe that's how he treated his guests, checking on them when they were asleep, pretending it was part of being a good host. I left again and went straight to another hotel. Later that day, I looked up reviews for that same Airbnb listing. There were a few new ones I hadn't seen before. 2 different people had written that they'd woken up in the night to find the host inside the rental. One of them said he claimed he was just checking something, but they hadn't believed him. It made my stomach turn. I realized that I had become another one of those stories. I had just been lucky that night that he didn't decide to do more than stand there. In the days after, I kept thinking about the way he'd looked at me when he saw I was awake. There was no shock on his face, no guilt, just a blank expression, like he was studying me, like he was deciding something. I deleted my Airbnb account not long after that. I couldn't bring myself to trust another listing. Every time I stay somewhere new now, I check the locks 3 or 4 times. I set up my own portable door alarm, wedge something under the handle, even push a chair against the knob. I can't sleep easily anywhere that's not home anymore. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, thinking I saw someone standing in the doorway. Even though I know I'm safe, the memory of that shadow still burns in my mind. Because once you've seen a stranger watching you while you sleep, you can't ever really forget it. You start to understand how fragile that thin line between safety and danger really is, how easily it can be crossed, even by something as simple as a broken lock and a quiet step in the dark. I booked that Airbnb because it seemed safe and quiet. It was a small apartment on the edge of town, in a nice-looking neighborhood with clean sidewalks and little trees along the road. The pictures showed a cozy studio with white walls, a balcony, and simple furniture. The host's profile looked friendly, dozens of good reviews, all saying things like, "Great place, clean, friendly owner." I didn't think twice about it. I just wanted somewhere peaceful to stay while I worked remotely for a week. When I got there, it looked just like the photos. The host met me briefly to hand over the key. He seemed normal enough, middle-aged, polite. He told me the apartment was separate from the rest of the house, that I'd have privacy, and that if I needed anything, I could message him. After that, I didn't see him again for a while. The first night was quiet. I set up my laptop on the small table near the window, unpacked a few things, and settled in. The place wasn't fancy, but it was clean. There was a faint smell of disinfectant and something floral like air freshener. The door had a simple lock, not very sturdy but enough to make me feel fine at the time. For the next few days, everything seemed normal. I worked during the day, went out for food, took walks in the evenings. I'd see the host's car parked outside sometimes, but I rarely heard any noise from the rest of the property. I kept my things organized. Laptop on the table, backpack near the bed, wallet and keys in the same spot every night. I had about $400 in cash in one of my bags. I didn't like carrying that much, but I'd withdrawn it before traveling, planning to use it for food and small expenses. I kept it zipped in the inner pocket of my bag. On the fourth day, I decided to go into town for a few hours. It was sunny, and I wanted to take a break from the screen. I packed my camera, left my laptop charging on the table, and made sure everything else was tidy. I remember hesitating for a second before leaving. Something small, like a quick thought about whether to bring the cash with me, but I decided it would be fine. The apartment felt safe. The host seemed trustworthy. When I came back that afternoon, the first thing I noticed was that the door felt different when I unlocked it. It didn't resist the same way it usually did. The key turned too easily. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cleaning spray, stronger than before. For a moment, I thought maybe the host had come in to fix something or drop off new towels. But then I saw my things. My backpack was open on the bed. The zippers were pulled wide, and everything inside was shuffled around. Clothes folded before were now wrinkled and piled carelessly. My toiletry bag was unzipped, items spread out on the blanket. The drawer where I'd put some cables was half open. My laptop was still on the table, but the screen was slightly tilted, like it had been moved. My stomach sank instantly. I went through my things one by one. Everything seemed there at first: camera, charger, clothes, but when I reached the inside pocket of the bag, the cash was gone. All of it. The envelope where I'd kept it was still there, but empty. I checked again, hoping maybe I'd misplaced it somewhere else, but deep down I already knew I hadn't. That sinking feeling grew worse as I looked around the room. It wasn't just that something was missing, it was knowing someone had been in there. Someone had touched my things, opened my bag, gone through every item while I was gone. The drawers, the luggage, even the little box where I kept my watch had been moved slightly from its spot. It wasn't random. Whoever it was had searched carefully, like they knew what they were looking for. I stood there for a while, trying to think straight. There was no sign of forced entry. The window was locked, and the door didn't show any damage. That meant whoever entered had a key. The host had mentioned before that he kept a spare for emergencies. At the time, it hadn't seemed like a big deal, but now it felt like a mistake to ever trust that. The more I looked around, the worse it felt. The air in the apartment was still thick with that smell of cleaner, which made me wonder if the host had tried to cover up being there. I noticed small details too. The curtains slightly pulled aside, a corner of the rug folded up, a faint smudge on the table near my laptop, like a handprint wiped halfway clean. I didn't know what to do right away. It was late afternoon, quiet outside, no neighbors in sight. I felt this strange mix of anger and fear. It wasn't just losing money, it was realizing someone had gone through private things, personal items. It made me feel exposed in a way I'd never felt before. I decided to leave the apartment right then. I packed everything quickly, checking every corner, every pocket. I took photos of the open drawers and the empty cash envelope, just in case I needed proof later. My hands were shaking the whole time. When I got to my car, I sat there for a few minutes, staring at the apartment. The blinds were half closed, the same as before, but now the place felt wrong. I had this heavy feeling that if I went back inside, I'd find more things out of place. I thought about how easily it had happened, how someone could just unlock a door, go through everything, and then lock it again like nothing ever happened. I drove to a nearby parking lot and stayed there while I figured out what to do. I opened the Airbnb app and looked at the listing again. The host still had glowing reviews, pages of them, but most were old. The few recent ones were vague, short comments that didn't say much. I wondered if anyone else had noticed things missing, or if I was the first to realize. That night, I booked a hotel room instead. It wasn't fancy, but it felt safe. I double-checked the locks 3 times before sleeping. I couldn't shake the image of someone standing in that apartment, quietly going through my things while I was out. The thought made my skin crawl. The next day, I filed a report with Airbnb. They said they would investigate and contact the host. I sent them the photos and a list of what was missing. I didn't hear back right away. A few days later, they refunded the stay and said the host's listing was under review. That was all they told me. The listing disappeared from the site not long after. It should have ended there, but it didn't feel over. I couldn't stop replaying it in my head. The way the room smelled different, how neatly everything had been put back just enough to look untouched at first glance. It made me realize how vulnerable travelers really are in those spaces. You walk into a stranger's property and trust that they'll respect your privacy. You believe the reviews, the photos, the polite messages, but you never really know what kind of person has access to your room, your bags, your things. What bothered me most was how calculated it felt. He hadn't taken anything big or obvious, just cash, something that wouldn't draw attention right away. He must have known I wouldn't notice until later, maybe after I left. Maybe he'd done it before. Maybe that was why the newer reviews were short and vague, from guests who didn't want to make a scene but knew something wasn't right. After that trip, I changed the way I travel. I never leave valuables behind. I never assume a locked door means safety. I take photos of everything when I check in and look for small signs. Things like extra keys hanging near the door or windows that don't latch properly. But even with all those precautions, that feeling has never fully gone away. There's something deeply unsettling about realizing someone has gone through your life while you weren't there. Someone you trusted just enough to let you stay under their roof. It's not the kind of fear that fades quickly. It lingers quietly, every time you close the door of a new place and tell yourself it's locked, wondering if someone else has the same key. We had been planning that trip for months. It was supposed to be a quiet getaway, just a few days to escape work and city noise. We found what looked like the perfect Airbnb, a small cottage in the countryside, not far from a lake. The photos showed a white wooden cabin surrounded by tall trees, a porch with a swing, and sunlight spilling through the windows. The price was lower than most places around that area, which we took as a lucky break. The reviews were few but all positive. It felt like a hidden gem, one of those rare finds you stumble across once in a while. The host's profile seemed normal. The description said it was a family-owned lakeside retreat, private, quiet, with access to hiking trails. It even mentioned a nearby convenience store and directions to a small fishing dock. Everything looked legitimate. The booking process went smoothly, and the host messaged once to confirm check-in details. They gave us the address, the check-in time, and said the key would be in a small lockbox by the door. It all sounded like every other place we'd stayed in before. We left early that morning. The drive took almost 5 hours. The first part was on highways, then smaller roads through small towns, and finally long stretches of countryside where cell service dropped in and out. The further we drove, the quieter it got. Old barns, overgrown fields, and scattered houses sat far apart from each other. By the time we reached the general area, it was late afternoon. The road had turned from pavement to gravel, and GPS said we were only a few minutes away. The sun was starting to dip, and the trees cast long shadows across the road. I remember feeling a mix of excitement and relief that we were finally close. But when we got to the address, there was nothing there. The GPS announced the location, but all we saw was an empty patch of land. The road ended at a small clearing surrounded by woods. There was no cottage, no porch, no swing, nothing even close to what the pictures had shown. The ground was uneven, covered with wild grass and scattered rocks. It looked like no one had built anything there in years. We checked the directions again, thinking maybe we'd missed a turn. The map showed we were right where we were supposed to be. The address matched exactly. We drove a little further down the road, thinking maybe it was the next lot over, but the only thing we found was a chain link fence and a field. No houses, no signs, no driveways. The air felt heavy in that place. There was no sound except the wind moving through the trees. I remember looking around and realizing how isolated we were. The closest sign of life was miles back, where we'd passed an old gas station. The realization hit slowly. It wasn't that the place was hard to find. It didn't exist. I pulled up the listing again on my phone. The photos still looked the same, bright and welcoming, the kind of place people dream of escaping to. But when I looked closer, small things started to stand out. The photos didn't have any signs or landmarks. The windows didn't reflect anything recognizable. The background trees looked oddly generic, like the same few were repeated in different shots. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it was obvious. I zoomed in on the address on the map, trying to match it to the landscape around us. The land shape matched the image on the map, an open area next to the woods, but there was no structure, just grass, dirt, and a faint path where maybe years ago something had been, but not anymore. The longer we sat there, the more uncomfortable I felt. The light was fading, and the area was starting to feel deserted. There were no other cars on the road, no distant sounds of people or dogs or even birds. It was like being in the middle of nowhere with nothing around. The thought of being stranded there overnight made my chest tighten. I tried to pull up the listing again, but suddenly it wouldn't load. The app refreshed and showed an error. When I checked the host's profile, it was gone. No name, no picture, no listings. Just a blank space where the information used to be. It was as if the whole thing had been wiped out in minutes. That's when it hit me that we'd been scammed. It didn't even feel real at first. We had receipts, confirmation emails, messages, all of it looked official. But now there was nothing. No house, no host, no way to contact anyone. I started thinking about how easy it must be for someone to take pictures from another listing, change a few details, and post it again under a fake profile. Everything about it had looked convincing because it was stolen. We sat there for a while trying to decide what to do. The air was getting colder, and the sky had gone from orange to gray. I could feel the quiet pressing in. The more I looked at that empty field, the worse it felt. It wasn't just the scam. It was the fact that someone had gone through the effort to make it look real, to lead people out there. The idea that strangers had been tricked into driving to that same lonely spot made me uneasy. We decided to leave before it got dark. On the way back, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Near the edge of the clearing, partly hidden by tall weeds, was a mailbox lying on its side. The metal was rusted, and the numbers on it were faded. The same numbers from the listing's address. I stopped the car for a moment, just staring at it. That meant there had once been something there. Maybe a house long gone, torn down years ago. Maybe whoever had created the fake listing had used an old address that no longer existed. The rest of the drive back was quiet. The road twisted through miles of darkness, and every empty field looked the same. I couldn't stop thinking about that empty clearing, the way the address had led us straight there like a dead end. I kept wondering if anyone else had come looking before us, expecting a cozy weekend and finding nothing. When we finally got back into town, we found a small motel with a vacancy sign. The place was old, the walls thin, but it felt like safety compared to that stretch of empty land. I didn't sleep much, though. My mind kept replaying the drive, the false hope of that perfect cabin, the moment the truth sank in. The next morning, I tried to report the listing. By then, it was completely gone. The confirmation email link led to an error page. The photos were nowhere to be found. Airbnb's support eventually confirmed the profile was fake and that the photos had been stolen from another property in a different state. They refunded the money, but that didn't undo what it felt like to be out there, following fake directions into nothing. What still unsettles me most isn't losing the money or the time. It's the thought of whoever made that listing. They had to know exactly what they were doing. They knew people would drive out there, that they'd end up stranded in that deserted place. Maybe they never thought about it, or maybe they didn't care. But standing there that day, in that empty field surrounded by woods, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had wanted us to go there. It's strange how silence can make a place feel wrong. That clearing was just grass and dirt, but the quiet carried weight. I remember glancing at the tree line before leaving, half expecting to see someone watching. Of course, there was no one there, just the wind moving through tall grass and the sound of gravel under our tires as we pulled away. Since then, I've checked every listing differently. I look up addresses on satellite maps, cross-check images, and never trust low prices or new profiles. Because that trip taught me something I can't forget. Sometimes what looks safe, calm, and beautiful on a screen doesn't exist at all. And sometimes, when you go looking for it, all you find is an empty place waiting quietly, with nothing there but silence and the sense that you were never supposed to find it in the first place. We booked that Airbnb because it looked perfect for a quiet weekend away. It was a small house listed as a cozy country retreat, about an hour outside the city. The photos showed a bright little bedroom with white walls, a wooden bed frame, and large windows that opened to a field. It looked peaceful, simple, clean, exactly what we wanted. The reviews said it was quiet and private, which was what drew us to it. When we arrived, it was late afternoon. The road to the property wound through empty farmland, and the air smelled like rain and grass. The host had left the key in a box by the door, and the entryway opened into a small living room that looked just like the photos. There was a small couch, a coffee table, and a faded rug that smelled faintly of old carpet cleaner. The house was a bit older than I expected, but nothing seemed wrong. We brought in our bags and looked around. The kitchen was tiny but organized. The bedroom had a large bed in the middle, made up neatly with crisp white sheets. There was soft light coming in through the window, and everything looked calm. We unpacked a few things, made coffee, and sat outside for a while. It felt nice to finally be away from noise and people. Later that evening, when it got dark, we got ready for bed. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the small fridge from the kitchen. We turned off the lights, got under the covers, and talked a bit about what we'd do the next day. The sheets felt cool and fresh, and I remember thinking how comfortable the bed was. At some point, I shifted to one side and noticed a strange smell. It wasn't strong, but it was noticeable, something metallic and sour, almost like rust. I thought maybe the sheets hadn't dried properly or the mattress was just old. I tried to ignore it, but after a few minutes, I couldn't. The smell was too specific. I sat up and pulled the blanket back to check. The sheets looked clean. No stains, no dirt. But the smell was stronger now, and it was definitely coming from the bed. My stomach tightened a little. I peeled back the top sheet, then the fitted sheet underneath, just to see if there was something wrong with the mattress. That's when I saw it. The middle of the mattress was covered in huge, dark stains. They spread out unevenly across the fabric, deep and dried into the material. The color wasn't faint, it was dark brown and red, like it had been soaked through at some point. It looked old but unmistakably like blood. It wasn't a small spot. It took up nearly half the center of the mattress, spreading toward the sides. The smell hit harder when the air touched it. I stepped back, covering my mouth, feeling a wave of nausea crawl up my throat. It didn't look like a spill. It didn't look like something small. It looked like someone had bled there for a long time, like it had soaked through layers. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My mind was trying to make sense of it. What could have caused that much blood? A nosebleed wouldn't do that. It was too much and too spread out. I remember tracing the edges of the stains with my eyes, noticing darker patches that almost looked like handprints or smears near the side. My stomach twisted tighter. I stepped back and sat on the edge of the chair in the corner, just looking at the bed. The house was silent, but suddenly it didn't feel peaceful anymore. The smell, the sight of that dark stain, it made everything inside me feel off. I couldn't stop picturing what had happened there. I couldn't sleep after that. Even after putting the sheets back, the image of that mattress stayed in my head. I lay on top of the blankets, wide awake, feeling the stillness of the house press down around me. Every small sound made me jump. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the fridge, the distant sound of wind outside. It felt like the walls were holding something in. The next morning, I checked the mattress again in daylight, hoping maybe it would look less bad. Didn't. The stains were even clearer in the sun. Brownish red, faded at the edges but still thick in the center. It was impossible to mistake it for anything else. I couldn't understand how anyone could just cover that up with clean sheets and rent it out. I started thinking about what could have happened there. Maybe someone had an accident, maybe something violent. The more I looked, the more I noticed. The floor beside the bed had small marks, almost like scratches. The wall near the corner had a faint scuff that looked like something had rubbed hard against it. None of it proved anything, but it all felt wrong. I didn't eat breakfast. I just packed my things slowly, feeling uneasy the whole time. Every room felt different now. The small marks on the floor, the faint smell of bleach near the bathroom, the way the curtains were pulled tight even though the view was harmless. It all made me uncomfortable in a way that's hard to explain. It felt like something bad had happened there, and someone had tried to make it normal again with new sheets and quiet reviews. I left the house before noon. When I walked out, the air outside felt fresher, lighter. I stood by the car for a minute, just looking back at the house. It looked peaceful, plain, like any normal rental. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened inside it had been serious, something that shouldn't have been covered up so easily. Later, after I got home, I looked up the address online. There wasn't much about it, but I did find something. A few years back, there had been a short local news report about a domestic incident at that same address. It mentioned a disturbance, police arriving late at night, and one person being taken to the hospital. The article didn't give many details. The house had been sold not long after. It wasn't proof of anything, but it fit too neatly. The location, the stains, the way the host didn't mention anything about the mattress being replaced. It made my skin crawl to think about it. Someone had probably cleaned up, replaced the furniture, repainted, and then turned it into an Airbnb. That night, I kept thinking about how easily people can hide things in plain sight. A fresh set of sheets, a few good reviews, and no one looks closer. The thought of sleeping inches above someone else's blood, someone's final moments maybe, made me feel sick. I thought about how many other rentals might be like that, places that had seen something terrible and were now just peaceful getaways. The worst part wasn't just what we saw. It was the feeling of not knowing the truth. That mattress told a story, but not all of it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark stains again, spreading under the clean sheets, quietly waiting for the next guest to lie down. Since then, I've never booked another Airbnb without reading everything carefully. I always pull back the sheets, always check what's underneath, because I learned something simple and disturbing that day. Some places aren't as clean as they look, and some stains don't wash away, no matter how many times you try.